Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another Focus Chat. I'm Alex Bolboaca, and today I'm not coming to you from the Mozaic Works studios. I'm in another secret location. But as usual, I have with me as a guest, Adi. Welcome, Adi.
Hello.
So I was thinking that we should discuss a little bit today in our Focus Chats about the other flavors of Agile and Lean software development other than Scrum, and explain a little where they are useful and why you would be interested in looking into things like Kanban and extreme programming. These are the main two that we have time to discuss today. There are many others, but I think these are the most used, the most well-known. So first of all, I think that many companies are actually using Scrum, right? But you're now working with an organization that uses a slightly different model. And I think this might be interesting for our listeners.
Yeah, so I think you need to look at what you need, and sometimes with Scrum you have these fixed iterations, which quite often for people feel unnatural. They feel that you have this way of working and you need one more day, but no, the sprint needs to end now. The other approach is to be more flexible, in a sense that you do have iterations of work, but those are, as I like to call them, business iterations. So iterations that are depending on the length of the business feature, and that can be a week, can be 3 days, can be 2 weeks, can be 7-8 days. They shouldn't be very long, but still you can have this type of iterations which are vary, and it's important that at the end of that iteration you put that thing in production. I think that's the most important.
Yeah, and this is something that is actually borrowed from extreme programming, because extreme programming is about working within a lot of unknowns, working within a domain where requirements change a lot, where you have no ideas, and even your managers, your business, they have no idea what they will need next. So when you work in such an environment, you need to take care about a few things. On one hand, you cannot have fixed sprints. It's much harder because you have different problems and you focus on one problem, and the problem that you're trying to solve might take, as you said, 2 weeks, 1 week, 3 days, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. You try to go as small as possible because you want to solve things as fast as possible and you want to deploy things as fast as possible. But some problems are just intractable. They are just large. And we know this from the engineering side of things. Some problems are actually more difficult than just than what can fit within 2 weeks. So and this is something that's very interesting, because in XP you are using these iterations that have not a fixed duration, but they have a very clear goal. Whereas in Scrum you use fixed sprints as duration. And I think many companies go for fixed sprints because they give you a sense of progress and they give you a sense of predictability. If you are working on larger projects, you can at least have a vague idea of how you can split that larger release into smaller sprints and have goals, and then monitor where you are within the release. And so on.
If you're not using no estimates, because in that moment you can still use variable sprints size.
Yeah, I think even with no estimates, so that depends on the definition of no estimates, but
Of
one
course, of
common
course.
way of doing no estimates is counting the stories that are within the sprint backlog instead of counting the story points. And that's still a kind of estimate, even though you are not working to get.
Exactly. Yeah. What I like about this idea of having variable length sprints is that you always have something in production at the end. So you always feel like, look, we achieved something. Whereas sometimes with Scrum, with fixed iterations, it feels very fragile, or it feels very weird that we worked for a sprint but we don't know exactly what we have, and maybe next sprint we'll put something in production but maybe not. So you don't really have this. It's difficult sometimes to have the sprint goal, as Scrum says. I know that's the theory, but in practice sometimes, especially in big organizations, it's kind of difficult to have the sprint goal.
Yes, and there are also, working with a lot of organizations, we notice that there are a few challenges with fitting things within a sprint. Some of them relate to lack of automation. If you don't have enough automated testing, if you don't have automated deployment, then of course things will go slow and you won't be able to develop and deploy within a sprint, or you'll just deliver very few features. And that's often not enough. Another challenge, however, is the ability to think incrementally, the ability to take a large problem and split it into small problems that you can solve one at a time and build on top of each other until you end up with something that is actually useful. And you can deploy the incremental things in time, which give you a measure of progress, even though maybe not all users are using them, or even though perhaps nobody's using them except your internal group. So, but we also noticed that there are some problems that are actually more difficult to fit within these fixed sprints. When you are doing research, when you are, real research.
Yes, definitely.
When you are solving problems that you've never solved before, those are the things that you cannot really estimate, and then you can play with them by taking yet another practice from extreme programming, which is doing experiments.
Experiments, spikes,
yeah.
Yeah.
And
I think that also another thing that for me is a bit interesting to see is that when you have fixed iterations, it was in Scrum, sometimes you have more overhead, so you're not that productive because you need to do all those meetings. Even though if you'd have just one a bit larger business iteration, if you'd look at the whole overhead, you'd have less overhead if you do have one business iteration. So that is good. But in another way, with XP, with these variable iterations, you need a lot more. You need to be very careful and really have know what you're doing, because you can really very well go into 9 months iteration. So it can be dangerous.
Yeah, and we know, so one of the reasons why Scrum has fixed sprints is to simplify things, because it simplifies things at least on the level of organization. You have a cycle, you go through a few ceremonies, you go through development, so it's quite easy to get into. It's something that's familiar, that happens again and again, and so after a while you forget about that part of the of Scrum and focus on the actual delivery and so on. But on the other hand, so I've been working with an organization who's also building hardware, and the hardware cycles are different. And we were just discussing a few days ago that it's very hard for them to fit developments on FPGA within a 2-week sprint. And perhaps it's partially it's because the builds take like 12 hours for hardware, and it's harder to optimize them because, as far as I understand, those are specialized tools and you cannot tweak them. It's what you get from your vendor. On the other hand, perhaps it's also about the architecture of the system. Perhaps multiple smaller components might build faster. It's also maybe about their incremental thinking. Maybe picking smaller increments might help them go fast. But on the other hand, perhaps it's just one of those things where you have an intractable problem, and it's better to just say, okay, so what is the problem that we're trying to solve this time? We're trying to introduce some new kind of hardware or feature within the hardware, and it will take us 4 weeks, or it will take us 5 weeks, or it will take us 2 weeks. And then it's easier to fit these things. And I think in engineering is pretty normal to think like that, because you're thinking, I have a big problem, I'm splitting it into smaller problems, and then what I know is when I've done solving one small problem, but I don't know when I'll be done solving the whole big thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's very useful. And then I think you need to be very careful with what you choose depending on the organization. Scrum, in a way, this is why they call all these things ceremonies, because you start repeating them all over and over, and it feels like almost like a religious act, like you do it over and over again. Then you might forget to optimize the flow because they start feeling natural. That's what, in a way, I think what you said, that you start having these meetings, and you definitely need an hour for that, 2 hours for that. But if you become really proficient, you may start thinking about the need of each one of them. So stop being religious and start being pragmatic in a way. I think that's where probably advanced Scrum teams would really fiddle with their setup.
Well, and to be fair with Scrum, because I like XP, I find extreme programming a complete method for building software. It has the engineering practices, it has the organizational practices within, and it really fits the engineering mindset and the mindset of people who want to solve problems. On the other hand, to be fair with Scrum, I know that Jeff Sutherland has talked about how Scrum is not the final thing. Scrum is just a way of bootstrapping your Agile method of work.
Yeah, exactly.
So you start from Scrum because it gives you a way of identifying very quickly what your problems are, but then it's up to you to actually solve your problems by introducing automation, by introducing engineering practices. And they say the XP engineering practices should be introduced in Scrum. And then you can also do things like reducing the sprint size. Because if you have a sprint size of 1 day, for example, then you suddenly don't need any more, and we've seen this, you suddenly don't need any more a very long planning. Your sprint plan will take 5 minutes. You won't need a daily meeting because you've already done that, right?
So that's what I was saying when optimizing Scrum. But let's face it, probably the big majority of teams remain at that 2 week or 1 week or whatever with those ceremonies, and that's all. But you can go a lot further with it, and you can really use it to your advantage.
Yes, and this is actually where I think that the mindset from Lean, from Kanban, combined with the visualization from Kanban can help you a lot. I like combining, so the least, at least I'd like to have within my the Scrum teams that I work with, to have a Kanban board that shows stages in the development of the software, not only to doing done, but also the other steps in the process. And if not at the team level, then higher up than the team level, because somebody needs to look at the whole release process, what is going on there. From the moment somebody requires a feature until it's actually in production used by people, you have a cycle there. And this is where Kanban is very useful for visualizing, but also the key part of Kanban is improving, reducing the cycle time, figuring out way to remove waste, to reduce the cycle time. And the end result tends to be similar, because if you look at the team level, what are the things that you will start optimizing? More automation, engineering practices, preventing mistakes, preventing bugs by having automated tests that you run all the time, and so on. And on an organization level, if you have multiple teams who need to pass to one another the work, you start noticing that that's a longer cycle time, and then you tend to get cross-functional teams that will develop things much faster, because they are within a team. So, and I think Kanban with XP, they work extremely well. It's one of those things that they just fit together. You can visualize your process with Kanban and optimize it, and use the XP practices to do the rest.
So I like Scrum for extreme beginners, because I think it brings you that new way of working that in a way has rules and has, it's a framework, yes, but it's a framework that where you really have some really good guidelines. I like extreme programming for a very product business approach where you need good technical practices, a product where technical practices are essential, so you start having those parts of automation. And I like Kanban very much when you have these nifty, fast type of activities like support, like startups that have some products and they really want to deliver fast, even a few deployments per day. What are your preferences on that?
I like, even when we have teams starting with Scrum, and Scrum indeed is a very good way of starting. And I always explain to people that this is, look, what the co-creators of Scrum say is that it's a way of bootstrapping your process. It's not the process that you should keep. It's the process that you start with. So it's important to have this mindset, but it's very easy to start with Scrum. But then it depends a lot on the organization topology, because often organizations start with Scrum, but they don't have full cross-functional teams. They might not have full allocation inside the team, and you have people working on multiple projects, in fact, and not on one thing, on one backlog, on one product. So there are a lot of changes that organizations need to go to. And if they are willing to do so and to make these changes from the beginning, that's great. But sometimes it's harder. And then one thing that really helps is to have them organize in sprints however they want, but then visualize the whole release process using Kanban, and do this on a higher level, so the level of management, and then keep looking at it and keep optimizing it. And guess what? You end up with cross-functional team, with fully allocated people, with if you are serious about the improvements, with automation and so on.
So you look at blockages, you look at long handoffs, at handoffs that generated defects or big wait times, or you look at capability. Sometimes probably you have bottlenecks because of lack of skills or not enough people, not enough capacity. So all these things in fact are about improving flow. And I think that this is very useful. In a way it comes from lean, right? It's a lean approach, and Kanban has something to do with lean, so it's very yeah, that's true.
So one thing that people don't realize when I talk about Agile, Lean, and Scrum and Kanban, it's like they are two very different things, and they are not, because Kanban came from Lean software development, which has roots in Lean manufacturing, and Scrum comes from Lean manufacturing as well, because that was the part of the insights that the Scrum co-creators had came from Lean manufacturing. So they are actually close cousins. That's why you can combine them in various ways. And of course, then Kanban is very useful for operations, is very useful for DevOps, is very useful for
any type of support activity, basically.
Any type of support, any type of monitoring. I've been working to introduce Kanban for companies that were doing search engine optimization monitoring or brand monitoring from marketing. So these were marketing companies doing these things. And again, it's what you have is a flow of things that you need to do. You need to do them repeatedly, and so you want to do them as optimized as possible and to watch for bottlenecks and all these things. And Kanban there is incredibly useful.
I've done the same with a few teams on support, where they had tasks that were like 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, but also they had tasks like half a day, but also tasks like a few days. So you look at types of work, and it worked really well for them. It felt very natural, and I think after a few months, like 5 or 6 months, they said that they improved their efficiency with something like 40 or 45%, just because they started working like that with the same number of people. Nothing changed, just the way of working. So that's very impressive when you start using Kanban for this type of activities.
And then if you go into even more advanced things, one of the things in Kanban is that you look at bugs as waste, and every mistake actually that is made. So and if you start doing that, then of course you'll always make mistakes as a team. So the goal of this is not to blame people. The goal of this is, however, to look at bugs as mistakes and then do a root cause analysis and fix your process so that at least that type of mistake will not happen again, or not as easy as it did. And this saves a lot of time, because we spend probably the most wasteful hours of our time are spent redoing the same work that we didn't do right the first time for various reasons. We were tired, we didn't know how to do it, the process wasn't in place to do it correctly, we didn't have the tools, we didn't have automation necessary, and so on. And if you start fixing these things, you suddenly reduce your expenses and increase your efficiency, your effectiveness. And you can see this with the DevOps movement, which took Lean very seriously and applied it to infrastructure. And suddenly you have a very clear business case there, because you can reduce costs by humongous amounts just by having the right process in place. it's great. And to finish with extreme programming, I really like extreme programming because it's, as I said, it's a full-fledged method that fits an engineering mindset. And so I use XP even when I'm working alone and working on the infrastructure of Mosaic Works. My way of working is derived from XP. I think about the problems that I need to solve. I think about the next problem. I figure out how long it might take me to fix that problem. I take the time because I have to schedule within clients and so on to do this development. And then I finish it, and I always want to deploy something at the end. And I take a lot of notes that help me look back and figure out how I can look at these problems better in the future. So that's even at the level of infrastructure, I apply the same things. And this is not always, I'm not always doing test-driven development on those things, because sometimes it's connection between different websites or synchronization between tools. That's hard to test drive. It's not as something that you can do as easily. But there's the same mindset. Get the problem, fix it, deploy, and keep going in these cycles.
Yeah, so in the end, extreme programming is not a methodology. In a way, it's a mindset of working. And I think if you look at it like that, you can apply it basically everywhere.
Yeah, because I kept thinking about what is engineering and how do engineers solve problems, because I was trying to figure out what can we call software engineering and what is actually software engineering. And is software development a craft or engineering or whatever? What is it? We have all these conversations again and again in the industry. And I think the mindset of engineers is to build something. So you focus on one problem and you focus on solving that problem alone. The first bridge engineers were focusing how to build one bridge, the bridge they were working on, and not all the possible bridges that you could build or all the bridges in that family, just that bridge. And in doing so, how do you do it? You do some experiments, spikes, you try out things, you build something and see whether it's actually stable or not, and you can measure certain things and so on. And if you do this for long enough, then you start seeing some repeated patterns, then eventually turn into science and formulas and so on, and then you can use that science into building better bridges. And that's kind of how it works. And for me, extreme programming takes this engineering way of thinking and actually uses it. So you think about large problems, split it into small problems. Each problem becomes something that you work on for a period of time. And if you don't know how to solve it, you do spikes, you experiment, and so on. You iterate.
Yeah.
All these kinds of things.
The only problem with extreme programming is its name, because when you go to management or top management and say you want to do something extreme, they will say no. So that's why typically I never say extreme programming. I just try to use practices very hands-on and really start doing them. Maybe after a year or two I will tell them we've done extreme programming, otherwise I think the name is very unfortunate.
Yeah, so the explanation of the name is that they took the practices that they were doing and thought about what if we take these practices that are helping us and taking them to the extreme. So what if instead of writing unit tests or tests from time to time, what if we start by writing tests? So that would be the extreme version of writing tests. What if we take things like reviews and take them to the extreme and do pair programming and so on. So that was the initial idea. And then something very interesting happened, because Ken Beck recently shared on Twitter a picture from a newspaper that was saying that of course companies who are doing XP are doing really well because XP it's a trick. And this was from, I don't know when XP came up, so like 20 years ago roughly. So at its beginning, extreme programming was considered something that if you do it, then everything will get better for the organization. And the challenge was actually to adopt it. But somehow this changed. And then people, I don't know, they started hearing extreme and it didn't sound so well, and Scrum came up and something switched there. But it was very interesting to see that in the history of extreme programming, it was actually seen as a very good solution, despite its name.
Yeah, I think it really is. Just with the name, it's not it's not that useful.
Yeah. So today it's true. All right. So I think we covered a lot of ground with Scrum, XP, Kanban. By the way, I like to combine Scrum without some of the XP engineering practices doesn't work that well. It will just be very slow. Kanban pushes you towards those engineering practices if you take Kanban seriously.
Yeah, if you listen to what it's telling you, listen to the feedback, yes, but you need some experience to listen to what Kanban tells you.
And if you have already knowledge and skills in extreme programming, then applying them within a Scrum or Kanban context is just very easy. It just works. But I think the hard part about these things is that universities don't teach them. Very few universities teach Scrum, Kanban.
And even when they teach them, it's very prescriptive. It's like, you need to do this and this and that, and that's all. It's almost no difference between waterfall, rational unified process, lean, Kanban, and Scrum. So it's the rules. You need to follow them. Let's go.
Yeah, and of course you can explain Scrum like that, but you need to start from the theory of complex adaptive systems and from that side, because it has a very strong theoretical basis, but it's just not many people know about it. And then I still find it a waste that not many universities teach properly test-driven development and refactoring and design patterns and design principles, things that are absolutely necessary when you're doing software development.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So that's, I think my conclusion would be that don't be afraid to combine these things, understand what they are and what they are helpful for.
Yeah.
Look at extreme programming very seriously, at least at the engineering practices, because you will need them in your software development. And look at DevOps, which is yet another instantiation of Lean, in fact, but applied to operations and not applied to software development.
Mm-hmm. And there's a mindset in DevOps as well. It's just it's not just about tooling and scripting and tooling. It's very similar to what we've discussed so far.
Yes, and what I like to perhaps people to be left with it after this is that we need to think in dynamic terms and not in static terms. It's not, this is the process and we'll do the process and the process will help us and so on. No, it doesn't work like this. Nothing works like this, because that would be easy. Everybody would be doing software perfectly by now if that were the case. You need to think in dynamic terms. You need to think about, this is where I am, this is what challenges I have, where do I want to be, how do I get there? And if that means changing things in your process, then absolutely do it. I know Scrum teams who are very advanced, who don't need to do dailies anymore, because if you pair program all day, you talk to each other all day. You don't need to do daily stand-ups anymore. But you need to understand why these practices are there and what you can replace them with and when you can drop them, because they are there for a reason always.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to add?
I think you need to know very well what you're doing. It's like, I don't know, you need to forget what are the rules when you, after you have used the rules a lot and you really know why they are there, and only after that you can forget the rules and start doing something beyond them, really more efficient and better for your context. But in the first period, you need to respect the rules and go by the book. Afterwards, when you start understanding, you can experiment and go wild and see where that leads you.
Yeah. Remember, the key thing in Scrum and Kanban and in extreme programming as well is changing your process so that it fits what you're doing and fits your context. That's the big idea in these things, and they give you a strong basis to start from, but then it's up to you to actually get to the point where the process fits you, how you work, or you also fit within the context much better. That's all right. So I think that was a good chat. Thank you, Adi.
Thank you as well.
If you enjoyed this focus chat, please let us know. We have to pay our dues to the YouTube algorithm, so please like, share, subscribe, comment, tell other people about this video. If you don't agree with us, or if you'd like us to go into more details on some of these topics, or if you prefer to discuss about other topics, please let us know. We are open to suggestions, always looking to find things that are interesting for you to listen to and to learn more about. I'd like to thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Adi, for setting this up and making sure that we have the video and everything going fine, even with me being in another remote location. And until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart.